Okay, now that you've seen the video segment that we have done last fall, I apologize for minor mistakes. It was just meant to be seen by a few people, but we decided to use this segment so I don't have to listen to myself talk all the time. I have more important things to show. As far as you might have many questions right now, they can be answered much later, but this presentation deals mainly with the decipherment of the scripts. I would like to give a little description on how I was able to key in on this script. I took basically a lot of the alphabets and I keyed them together and I compared them to what looked like the script of the Burroughs Cave. And I noticed that the script was not the normal Semitic type of script that you see on a lot of the Punic and the Phoenician Aramaic artifacts, but that you did see forms of script known as the Iberian script and also very close to the Etruscan script. So then after being able to translate some of the words, I was determined that it was basically Italic people, mainly settlers from Spain and North Africa, that wrote this script, because in Rome itself the script developed more into the modern script, but it took longer, perhaps a century longer, for it to develop into the Latin script and the provincials. This is why you see this type of script in this archaic form of Latin. I've been also able to detect hieroglyphs as well as the North African Numidian script that has been used at that time. Okay, now to describe some decipherments of more artifacts. Okay, this is one of the artifacts from the Lazaria collection. It is called the whale stone because basically it has a little picture of a whale. Some of you might have seen yesterday, I pointed out on the reverse of this stone, can be available for you viewing later on. There is a ship in the back that has an emblem on the sail, which is identical to the Haisar that I translated from Numidian as Caesar. That kept me wondering a little while, but I made the connection that it is actually a symbol of the port city from where it comes from, which is the city of Yol Caesarea, the capital of Mauritania under King Yuba. And this is why you see that symbol, and I believe the part in Oklahoma showing Haisar is a symbol for Yol Caesarea, that we came from there and we are colonists from there, or boundary mark. Okay, let's look at the stone here. You have the archaic script here written in different columns. I was able to decipher it and read it, and it reads from bottom to top, each line here. And here you have the characters to the right, which appear to be very similar to Ogham, but I believe it's a numerical index system in this case. Okay, let's take a look at the basic transliteration and translation. Initially, I thought it would talk about a ship or some type of a historical event, but I guess I had to be taught a biology lesson here, and the whale on the bottom made sense to me. Okay, basically after deciphering the script, it came out to a vulgar form of Latin, which pronounces fateo litiga quid capesare effetto et aiubalina carme gymnetitos loc coevebat finios et via finito hodie. Okay, let's give a translation of what it says. You can take a look at this real quickly just to get an idea. I can write books on the decipherment, which I will do later once the tomb has been identified. But let me give you the translation of what this stone here, and it's very interesting. It looks like the person in the boat in the back was putting something into the water or making an observation, and this is what he says. He says, "I am revealing an argument which I will make understandable. I affirm that not only do whales make sounds when mating, but occasionally approach land ending their travels." Very interesting. We had a scientist back then who did a study on whales, and it's recorded in the Burroughs Cave. I like history and battles, so I was disappointed. Okay.
You just found that out 20 years ago.
Really? Unbelievable. I didn't know that. They found that out 20...
I told you people yesterday that Yuba was a natural history.
Yes, Yuba was natural history, and a ship from Caesarea, it could have been an observation that he would go. Okay, here we have another stone. Some of the script is more block-like. You will see that on a lot of these artifacts, the script is more Iberic, very Punic related to to those people. But then you see some scripts that develop more into modern, which you can see possibly more the Italian influence of the settlers, more from Italy. This particular stone has a bunch of script on the front. And can you show the reverse? I don't know if it's going to be very visible. Okay. Alright, and here's the script. Okay, it's not very visible, but you see, it's not very visible. We'll show the photograph close up better. What you see at the bottom is a snake, and then at the top it appears to be a little figure of a small child wearing some cloth. And you see a snake. You see a snake right there. Here appears to be a little round circle with like 5 little, I interpret that as a foot with 5 toes, a snake. And down at the bottom here, you see a little triangle, and it looks like a small child. I was baffled by this. I thought it was a religious symbol of Tanit or something, but then I concluded after reading it that it was just a little personal stone, and it turned out to be a type of a funeral stone. Let's see what it reads. In a vulgar form of Latin, it reads, Gego filio pax tuo ili lapis bile ponius. And as best as I can translate it as son who is blind in body, which I interpret as dead, peace be with you. This stone is sadly placed. And from what you can see in the reverse of this picture, it appears that possibly a little boy was bitten by a snake on a foot, and whoever placed the stone wrote this on there in honor of this small child. So we're starting to see some little personal things in the Burroughs Cave also. Let's go to the next one. Now let's look at another face. You've seen the other faces before, and here's another face that I was able to identify in a Burroughs Cave. Kind of a man with a very broad face, a large crown-like helmet. By looking at his physical features, he appears to be a very heavy-set man, and not very attractive either. Let's take a look at the script, and I was able to read it relatively easily. Let's look at the top. Okay, it's read. It looks like this, the head in the middle. It's read aulete tiba. Aulete tiba. So let's show the bottom here. Aulete tiba, which represents a flute player. In Greek and in Latin it means flute player. Now who is the flute player? Looks like a monarch type person that is known as flute player. Well, it turns out to be Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy the 11th. And he was known as Ptolemy Auletes, the flute player, and he was a heavy-set man and a very lazy man who catered to the Romans. And this is what the physical characteristics I get here is a very heavy-set type of person. And he wasn't very well liked by Cleopatra or anybody else because she said he was too timid and didn't act like a king. But he was referred to as the flute player because he liked playing the flute. And here we have a depiction in the Burroughs Cave of Ptolemy the 11th, the flute player, father of Cleopatra the 7th. Okay, next. Now this is the stone that really put the nail in the coffin for me as to what is in the tomb. You have the same type of inscription again. Okay, and it reads again from right to left, and then from left to right, and on, which I had called snake in the other video, but there's a fancy word which I forget all the time. Okay. Okay, and it reads as, here's the kind of lettering here, Bello helio albo et filia quideleo bene finivi, quoque perhibe reges el netua. And the translation is very interesting on this stone. And it translates as the handsome white Helios, defined as the righteous one by the people and possessor of the Hellenic kings. Now when I read possessor of the Hellenic kings, I was saying, well, it must be referring to all these other corpses that are in the body, and this Alexander Helios is the possessor. Now the main question I had, and we're still pondering over the answer, and I have a hypothesis over it, is how did the tomb get from Alexandria to America? We have evidence from the description what Russ gave of the tomb, the person that is depicted in the tomb, and by the way, the bird that you saw in Alexander, the falcon-like bird, It's very interesting that the word Alexandros in Greek means fowl of the air, which a cock, a bird, or fowl of the air. And it's very interesting. It seems like that he wore his name or his emblem on his shield and on his breastplate. And now we have this here, which seems like as Alexander Helios disappeared from history as a small boy, he somehow ended up over here to run this Mauritanian colony for his brother-in-law Yuba, who was married to Cleopatra Selene. How did the tomb leave Alexandria? I just have a hypothesis right now. I believe Yuba, being the collector that he was, he purchased just about any expensive item that was relevant to history, books, marble statues, anything. I believe that he possibly purchased that entire crypt and became its caretaker in Mauritania and purchased it for his wife Cleopatra Selene, and following her death from 6 to 9 AD, it somehow got over here in the possession of her brother Alexander Helios, which we don't hear about in Europe, but we hear about here on these inscriptions. Very possible. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, this is a stone which belongs to the ISAC collection. And at first I just looked at these letters here, which appeared to be this form of archaic Latin that was used. And I started reading it, and let's look at the transliteration. I wasn't observant, as I usually am, with articles, because when I translated this, it says, Octitibus effetto vita perpetuo ut sive eot, which translates to, with your death will begin eternal life in this manner, or in a likewise manner. And I was like, this is a very incomplete stone, and I thought I might have possibly done something wrong. But then as I took a look at it, I believe it was John or Harry that pointed out, hey, wait a minute, there's something on the side here. And let's take a look at this here. On the side appears to be what looks like an Egyptian hieroglyphic formula, not so much in the Egyptian language, but symbolic. And it's almost a standard type of chant that you find in the Book of the Dead, and this is more of a later version, as you can see. It's very difficult to see here. You see like it ends up like 3 lines going down. I don't know if you can, I've drawn a little better here, right there. Here you see like walking. There you see the 2 reeds. And here this is an eye, but my drawing isn't that good. Here's a stairway. And here appears to be like a circle or some kind of a saucer shape, round circle. I believe he intended to draw as a circle. But when I look at the formula here, reading the Book of the Dead and other chants, this appears to be like a birth, the birthing sign to me. Walking, Osiris, stairway, Sun Ra, abode of Ra, and which I will, it seems like it gives an answer to what was previously done in pictorial formula. I will be reborn when I, like Osiris, have gone up the stairway to heaven to the celestial abode of Ra, which was the goal of every person that died who believed in that form of religion, is to assimilate what Osiris has done, is to resurrect and climb up that secret stairway into the abode of Ra, and every pharaoh after that had to emulate this wicked journey in the afterlife. It was a very difficult journey, but when they reached the end, they followed exactly what Osiris had done, and I believe that's exactly what this stone is. Could have also carried through to the cult of Isis and Serapis somehow, because he's writing in Latin and he has these symbols on there, so it could also be a symbol of the cult of Isis and Serapis. Yes, a very interesting. Could just be a circle and he didn't have room, or just something very interesting, which I believe is the abode of Ra or something like that. Let's take a look at the next one. It's going to get real interesting. Can I see this? Okay, this is a stone owned by Beverly Mosley. I was able to get the script end of the photograph at first, and on the bottom of the stone, and then at the top looks like a little figurine that could have possibly, I hypothesized, been Tanith. But I concluded that it was a type of an observation, the I meaning I see or I saw. As you can see in the photograph, it's not that clear here for some reason. I was able to translate the stone first, and I was kind of shocked at what it said. But then I found out that there was also a photograph of the stone and a reverse of the stone, and we were able to get the photograph, and it pretty much confirmed to what we were seeing and what we were saying. And we've read a lot of ancient history that also confirmed such a sighting. It's something I try to get away from, but it just happened to be there. The observation reads, Sisteo aeli relapsus betus via basis metere lux minave multoa, and it translates to as such: a basket-like object magnificently comes and goes in a swift-like motion, and on its base can be observed many red lights twisting together. That's a very bizarre sighting for something that happened in ancient times. And it looked like, from what you can see, the eye on the bottom, and this little doll-like object he was looking up to as a description of what he could have been seeing. I thought he probably saw a divinity or something. But when I saw the reverse of the stone, it kind of blew my mind. Because of what the picture it shows. It shows a large flaming circular object, and there's a lot of spike points going, and it looks like there's a trail, like some kind of a comet moving or some type. And that's what I thought at first. It could be some kind of comet-like object moving, and it's in an edition of the Midwestern Epigraphic magazine. The last edition shows a picture of that. But the inscriptions on the side are very interesting, which let's go and get a better view of the inscription. The top part on the right, it says "Effebit perpetually efficies bel," and it says "in likeness of a monster that constantly glows." And at the bottom it says "Ubiti est teletus," where its armor is made of bronze. So he's talking about a flying object that's glowing, that has red lights twisting it together, and its armor is made of bronze. And that kind of blew my mind, and we had to read a lot of ancient history to see that there were such accounts in ancient history, especially in Pliny. And another peculiar thing is I saw the two marks, the signature of Yuba on that stone. Could it be that he personally made the observation and had somebody write it down for him? Very observant person, he might have noticed something that was worth recording, and it ended up in a Burroughs cave. Okay, now, what did I do with the inscriptions? Well, I'm working currently on the decipherment of the Iberic inscriptions in Spain, and I disagree with a lot of people how the work has been done. I'm basically following my grandfather's work because he has been starting working, and I'm working on the decipherment of the Etruscan scripts in Italy, which now a lot of the alphabetic letters that I've been able to derive from what you see in a Burroughs cave, they work very well in the Italian inscriptions. Now here, this is a page, I still have yet to get the book exactly where it came from, but this picture here was sent to me by Victor Couture, and he quoted it out of a book from some person in Russia who tried to translate Etruscan as a form of Slavic last century. But what I did is I basically cut the picture out and I looked at the letters here. And what you see is, you see two persons and two people with swords and a man in the middle. Well, the first thing, the key to deciphering is you have to use a little bit of common sense. It looks like there's two men with swords and a man standing in the middle looking at one of them. Well, the first thing I said, well, it looks like the man in the middle is a form of a referee, and it's the beginning of a gladiatorial combat. The translation that the Russian man translated was a very ludicrous translation that just didn't make sense, and he read it backwards too. When you take the letters and break them down, it shows that this is a very similar form of archaic Latin that you see in Etruscan inscriptions with a big Greek influence. Now what I'm trying to do is some of the letters that I'm using is I'm plugging back in, and they're working as to an old Indo-Germanic Etruscan Latin inscription, but this is from Italy. I read it from right to left. And when you break it down here, this is a transliteration. It's an archaic form saying, Nes otama he uno sot moros yugel miso. And it's a very old form. This is probably dating 3rd century BC, or maybe even later if it's in the provincials, because the provincials used this old script and didn't develop into the more Latin. But as you'll translate it, this man here is saying, you will not disengage before one of you delivers death by killing the other with his sword, which makes perfect sense what this would be saying. And this is exactly what when you look in a Latin dictionary, you can get these words and you can trace it back. And what you usually have to do is you have to take the root word. Now you see a Greek influence here. Nes, no, su, otama. Well, the more modern Latin word is otiam, which means free time, leisure time, or in a military offense also means to disengage. The pe is an archaic form, which more modern I translate to as pre, uno, one. Sot is actually a Greek-based word from soter, which means deliverer, and in this case it could be a verbal form meaning to deliver. Mors means death. Yugel miso means killing with a sword. So this is what this inscription in Italy says, and deciphering the Burroughs Cave inscriptions and getting letters has helped me a lot with what I'm doing in Italy, and these are the first publications I'm going to be publishing. As far as Burroughs Cave goes, we still need 100% evidence of the existence of the tomb, and that is where the stones come from for me to publish it. Okay, and this is in regards to the scripts here.
The thing that we have here, this little Etruscan thing, I was very happy to see that Dr. Mahan has 3 of these Pelican-type books in his library. And when the decipherment was made, we felt certain that, oh, okay, all we got to do is get an Etruscan professor to okay the work and everything will be fine. And much to our dismay, checking throughout Italy, throughout the Middle East, there were no Etruscan professors. No one had broken the script. So not only has Paul broken the script from the lost tomb of Alexander the Great, he has also codified and proven that using the same alphabet, he can decipher tablets from Italy and archaic Latin, which comes from the Etruscan. Now, just briefly, all I'm going to do is run through this and just point out the highlights. This book was printed, it's a paperback, it was printed in 1956. And you get a title sheet with it. And the first page, I have the word problem underlined. The second page, problems, 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 problems. Have Etruscan inscriptions been interpreted? Problem. Bilingual inscription written in Etruscan and in a second language known to us. That is Latin or Greek. Okay, page 231. Few and brief key documents available for Etruscan. We can definitely state that so far no key has been discovered. This is printed in 1956. There'd been the 3 gold tablets that had popped up, I believe, in the early 70s, which were of some significance. Reading further, the finding of a lengthy bilingual text discovery will proceed in slow gradual stages before reaching the final goal set by the limits of material possibility. The problem, right here, Etruscan, linguistically isolated. Go to the next page. There's nothing on that. The rest of it you can read later. Here we go, talking about Etruscan again, to its italic branch. Note that. Keeping on going to the next underline. The rest of it you can read later. Here we go. On the 241, you will notice I've underlined Latin funerary inscriptions have been couched in both Etruscan and Latin. The discovery of one such inscription would revolutionize the whole development of research in Etruscan. Down further, one single new source may be sufficient to lead scholars to a final and successful solution of the problem. Reading down further, our only hope rests on the discovery of papyri in Egypt. Such a miraculous find would re-echo the extraordinary discovery of an Etruscan text written on the linen wrappings of an Egyptian mummy, which we're going to talk about in just a second. In only one case can we speak of a manuscript. This is 1956, less than 40 years ago. Right here we see, and used to wrap a mummy of an Egyptian woman in Ptolemaic or Roman times. Farther down, at least 12 vertical columns. It comprises 1,185 words. And I would differ with that. It's probably a lot less. And then right down, 100 more words is what else they have in Etruscan. So they have 1,185, which they don't really have deciphered, and then 100 more. And then we're talking about original words becomes reduced to about 530. Going to page 243, 10 chapters is what is on the lines. Separated by horizontal lines, 62 preserved lines, and more than 300 legible words. The second part of the text is very damaged. The writing runs from right to left and from left to right on alternate lines. Reading down further, on two of its faces, an important inscription of 46 lines and 130 words. And it's on a carved thing on both sides, which is basically what we have in this tomb. It is difficult sometimes to decide whether a group of letters contains one or two words. And Paul has the knack of figuring that out. He's just blessed and gifted. A certain variety of used words, which is they are quite indicative. A few mixed formulas. And then they see that they have them carved on the walls of tombs. Now here we get a little bit more interesting. A few Etrusco-Latin inscriptions on 244. Moving down to the B, Etruscan elements have been passed into Latin. Number D, Latin versions of original Etruscan texts. The glosses are Etruscan words with Latin or Greek translation. And down further, Etrusco-Latin bilingual texts. At the top of 245, may be modified by a Greek or Latin ending. Down here a little bit further, Etruscan elements have passed into Latin. They are thought to be characterized by their endings. Down at the bottom of 245, an Etruscan origin may be more correctly attributed to Latin words. Continuing, 246, Etruscan acted as an intermediary between Greek and Latin. Etruscan may have had limited influence on the phonetics and morphology of Latin. Etruscan words surviving in vocabulary of Central Italian dialects. Where did Latin come from? Central Italy? Did it not? Where is Etruria? Where did the Etruscans live? And they're still having a problem figuring out that the Etruscan is Latin. And at this time I want to point out that I have a letter here dated December the 10th, 1994, written to me, addressed both to Paul and I, essentially, by Dr. Cyrus H. Gordon. I've played your videotape and paid close attention to its amazing story. Joe Mahan recently sent me an inscribed black stone from the cave with a translation by someone from Florida who deciphered and translated the text as Etruscan. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Cyrus Gordon is probably one of the most respected linguists in the world, and by far is the most highly recognized in the continental United States. I can't think of any living linguist that has printed more important data than he. And it says, the text says, "Are you the translator? If so, I am mystified because your videotape represents you as reading the cave texts as Latin." So here we see that even in 1994, Dr. Cyrus Gordon, it didn't click that the Etruscan was Latin. I reported to Joe that the translation of the Etruscan text is full of words in English whose equivalents are so far not known in Etruscan, but they were known in Latin. Now, we come to page 257 where we're talking about the alphabet, and then on page 259, in the far right-hand corner, down towards the bottom, you see an S with a dot over the top of it. And if you go just to the left of that, now this particular alphabet that they printed in here is not quite as accurate as it's the most accurate that they had in 1956, but in the later 60s and through the 70s and early 80s, the Etruscan alphabets began to get a little bit more accurate. But just to the left of that S with a dot over it, we see positively that these people, even though as much as they got incorrect, they had that the S written as an X.
Well, you took it, Tom, I'll have to ask you that.
Well, no, the last thing is that the material that we'd shown here, except for this one that's on, is not for publication and replication in mass quantities at this time until we actually have confirmation and have been inside the tomb. And thank you.